Good evening, this is Viewpoint. I'm Zakka Jacob. India is gasping for breath, and quite literally at that. There is a serious oxygen shortage across major cities in the country. And the irony is, it's not because India does not produce enough oxygen. In fact, India is one of the world's largest producers of industrial grade oxygen. It is because our various state governments cannot be on the same page, so much so today the central government had to step in. But this oxygen crisis is symptomatic of the larger, more glaring lapses in our healthcare system that's been laid bare by this sordid second wave of COVID-19.
Mayapuri phase 1, you can see long queue of people with their cylinders here outside the factory, and all these people have come here to get the oxygen.
We as a doctor, we as a hospital, we are supposed to give life. If we cannot give them oxygen even, what is the situation? When patient comes to, patient will die. Patient will die.
भले ही आपको ऑक्सीजन टैंकर के साथ में पैरामिलिट्री फोर्सेस लगा के उन प्लांट्स में ऑक्सीजन भरवानी पड़े, लेकिन ये आपको इंटरवीन करना पड़ेगा, वरना बहुत मुश्किल हो जाएगा।
1 लीटर भी ऑक्सीजन रोकना नहीं चाह रहे, ना रोक रहे हैं। दिल्ली को हमारे पानीपत प्लांट से 140 मीट्रिक टन ऑक्सीजन अलॉट हुई है।
Now, with Delhi hospitals running low on oxygen for COVID patients, the Prime Minister today chaired an important meeting to ensure uninterrupted supply to hospitals in Delhi and the surrounding areas. He stressed on faster transportation of oxygen, increasing the output of medical oxygen. Remember, India is one of the largest producers of industrial grade oxygen. Increasing the speed of distributing oxygen to states, using innovative ways to supply oxygen, including roping in the railways to ramp up supply. Was this a crisis that could have been well averted if all our state governments were on the same page? And more importantly, is this symptomatic of the larger and more glaring lapses that have been exposed by this rather sordid second wave of COVID-19? Joining me on the talking point, Reena Gupta of the Aam Aadmi Party, Gopal Krishna Agarwal of the BJP, Dilip Cherian, Delhi resident and founder and consulting partner of Perfect Relations, and Suhail Seth, Delhi resident and columnist and author and actor. I'll start with you, Suhail Seth, because, you know, for me, the story that stands out in this whole oxygen shortage is not because there isn't enough oxygen around. India is one of the largest producers of industrial grade oxygen in the world. The problem is our state governments can't come on the same page and agree on basic transportation. So much so today, the central government had to intervene.
So, Zakka, as you rightly said at the beginning of the program, India is gasping for breath. The tragedy is not just India, but within India, people who are with comorbidities, with COVID. You know, we are keeping on mentioning COVID, but there are people lying in hospitals with severe comorbidities, some even more serious than COVID. But the tragedy is twofold. Number one, we didn't plan well enough. And now for the states to blame the center to blame the states is a typical Indian way of deflecting responsibility and accountability. The second point, Zakka, is that you, at least in the media, are taking it upon yourself. About an hour ago, I got a message because my mother is a patient at Fortis Gurugram. She goes for a chemotherapy there. I got a message from Fortis Gurugram saying they had 45 minutes of oxygen left. Correct. It's a 400 or 500 bed hospital. Can you imagine what trauma patients must be going through? But more importantly, the trauma that doctors, frontline workers, healthcare people in that hospital are going through. Who is going to be responsible? Who will have blood on their hands? And this is an avoidable tragedy. It was an avoidable tragedy if we had put plan and process in place, neither of which we did. We allowed this to catapult into a disaster. Today, Zakka, it's a shame. It's a shame. We keep tom-tomming India prowess, economic prowess and all of that. We don't have enough oxygen in our hospitals. We are now forcing, and it's the same private sector that people like Rahul Gandhi and all castigated for years on end. It is the private sector that has come out, obviously in partnership with the public sector, to lend a helping hand. Mukesh Ambani last Friday said, yes, Reliance will put out 500 tons, which he's now increased to 700 tons of medical grade oxygen. Companies are shutting down their plants and diverting oxygen that is desperately needed. Didn't we know that we would require this? Yeah. Didn't we know that in 1920, when the pandemic hit, the second wave was stronger than the first? Didn't we get any of these warning signals? The central government wrote to the states in January 2021. We are now in April. We are in the fourth month of the year. In the first month of the year, the central government wrote to the states, but no action was taken because we're a great country to blame people once the horse has bolted the door. And this is my enduring problem with the way we are running things. So today, this is what we have, Zakka. We have a country that doesn't have oxygen. We have a country where cases are spiraling. We have a country where vaccines are not available, and they will be available in a staggered manner. At least that they've done creditably well on. And there's complete confusion. So in light of all of this, Zakka, you tell me, if you're a patient, not only are you suffering physical distress and emotional distress, but you're passing that on to all your attendants, your family, your near and dear ones. No, is that really fair?
It is incredible. I'm sure everybody on this panel will agree. It's incredible the number of people we have known in our direct circle of friends or family, at least someone or the other who's had to run from hospital to hospital looking for an oxygen bed. But of all the things that Suhail said, the thing that stands out for me, Dilip Cherian, is this was an entirely avoidable problem. It's not like, people are dying because of an uninvented medicine. People are dying because of a mysterious illness. They're dying because of basic lack of oxygen. And today we had this phenomenal sight. I can't imagine that something like this would be happening in the national capital, where the biggest hospitals in the capital, Max, Apollo, are all approaching the High Court to ask the governments, both centre and state, to make oxygen available for them. I mean, Dilip, this is absolutely unacceptable.
There are two things which are unacceptable here. In the month of March, we exported a large quantity of oxygen from India. Did we not see some of this coming, and did we not prepare for it? Second, this is also an issue of federalism. You have states which are trying to commandeer oxygen merely because it is produced in that state. The worry that I have is that what Suhail mentioned, the blame game between the center and the state, between the states and the states, will continue. When we had a situation, I think 2 years ago, when a doctor in Uttar Pradesh was sent off to prison because he had commandeered oxygen to save the lives of children, we knew that oxygen supplies to hospitals, to the health sector, was a problem. It was visible to everybody, yet you wanted to hide the problem. My belief is that it is a good thing that today media is covering it, and it is a sad thing for every patient, every attendant, and for the prestige of this country. We are talking of a country which today tops the list in the world of new COVID patients. We should be worried that if they don't have hospital beds, ICU facilities, ventilators, oxygen supply, the whole panoply of things that citizens should expect is part of the healthcare system, seems to have fallen by the wayside, and only because of utter neglect. No. The anxiety I have is that we will continue this blame game while the cries of those who are lying in bed, seriously unwell.
We had this amazing sort of set of events today. And I want to ask Gopal Krishna Agarwal this. The vice chairperson of Apollo Hospital, which is not a Sarkari hospital, is one of the biggest private sector hospitals in this country. The vice chairperson had to tweet that her oxygen tankers are being blocked by one particular mantri in Haryana as it was being filled in Panipat, and those tankers were not being let out because this mantri said Haryana should get its oxygen first. I mean, how can we even wrap our heads around, Gopal Krishna Agarwal, how can we even wrap our heads around this oxygen regionalism? So much so today the Ministry of Home Affairs had to step in and say you can't have any barriers or hindrances for interstate movement of oxygen.
Zakka, first thing I would like to say, and what we have been discussing with you earlier also and today, is majorly the crisis of oxygen is about management. That we have to understand. And those who are now crying, tweeting, and other thing are saying that it was there for everybody to see, should first understand that why didn't they see it earlier. The thing is that nobody knew the scale of crisis and the requirement of oxygen or other medicine or the hospital infrastructure, etc. One thing. So we have to understand that it is the issue of management and the mismanagement which has seeped into our country due to several factors. And
No,
then,
but
Zakka, you cannot say
mismanagement by
no,
who?
Zakka, Zakka,
No, no,
just,
by
just,
who?
just
By
let
who?
me complete.
No, no,
Let me
you
complete.
said
I will just
mismanagement.
listen.
No, no, you
Hari.
said mismanagement, but
No,
mismanagement by
I
who?
tell you. That is the important. But then second part is you cannot say कि one person's tweet or one person said this and other person said this. Then you take one person's statement to be the and ask me to answer that. If Anil Vij is saying something and another person is saying something, that means there are two parties which are at conflict of their statements. So yeah, the thing is there is a crisis, there is a problem of management, and there who is acting to resolve it, that's also very important.
Okay.
When the prime minister himself is taking care of home minister, we have to respect the institutions. What the health ministry's reports are saying, what health ministry's report, you can go into that report, it will show how, and it is not today, those reports are earlier also, and how it has undermined the lack of health
No, no.
infrastructure
While,
at
while
the
I
state
agree with you,
level.
sir, while I agree with you that this was something that the centre had flagged way back in January, and we're awaiting Reena Gupta of the Aam Aadmi Party to join us. We'll try and connect to her as well. Yes, I agree with you on two things. On two things, I agree with you. One, this was flagged off by the centre, and two, yeah, one second. Two, the more important part, is today, Arvind Kejriwal at the last minute can't turn around and say, oh, centre's not giving us anything, Haryana is blocking, XYZ is blocking, Uttar Pradesh is blocking. Now, when proverbially, XYZ has hit the ceiling. The point is, if he had known this, he should have flagged this off a month ago. So I'll say, you want to respond to that? It's one thing for the Delhi government to say we have no powers, we don't produce. Delhi does not produce any oxygen. It has to come from neighboring states, and if those neighboring states are not cooperating, then we need either the centre to step in or some other means to resolve this. So I'll say,
with due respect to Mr. Agarwal, this is not the time to say BJP was right, Aam Aadmi is wrong, MVA is right, someone else is wrong. This is the time to understand how do we go forward. We can only go forward if we as a country recognize there is one India. There are Indians who need medical attention. There are Indians who need oxygen. It's not about a Haryanvi needing oxygen or a Bengali needing oxygen. You play the state regionalism and you drive the concept of India into the ground, which is what has been happening all this while. And for Mr. Agarwal to say this, it's a bit rich. Because Narendra Modi, when he took over on May 26, 2014, talked about federal cooperation. Where is federal cooperation? I completely agree with you. It is very easy for the Kejriwals. It's very easy for people because Zakka, these people cannot rise above politics. They don't share the pain of the citizen. They only share the voting patterns of the citizen. They don't care whether you and I get affected because we are not their voters. And look at the shamelessness with which the state governments have been attacking the center and vice versa. Where does that leave the citizen? I'm asking you a simple question, Zakka. When whales fight, shrimps are eaten. We are the shrimps. The whales are fighting. Not one member of parliament will not have access to oxygen.
okay.
Not one MLA will not have access to oxygen. It's the citizen who will suffer. He will suffer in pain and he will suffer in greater agony because of this ridiculous exchange of blame games that is continuing to happen in our country today.
This disease, as cruel. One second, Mr. Agarwal. This disease, as cruel as it is, has also been a leveler. We know so many stories of people who are well connected, who have influence, who have politicians on speed dial, cops on speed dial, who still have not been able to find a bed or an oxygenated bed or an ICU bed because this disease is all consuming. We're not getting, irrespective of, people with such tremendous agency. Jasmine Shah of the Aam Aadmi Party is joining us. He's the Vice Chairperson of the Delhi Dialogue Commission. Jasmine, the question that's being asked, and I think it's a legitimate question. Yes, Mr. Kejriwal is flagging off the lack of oxygen, Haryana blocking it, Uttar Pradesh blocking it and all of that. Why wake up at this 11th hour when Delhi is literally gasping for breath? This was an issue that was flagged off by the Union Health Ministry as far back as January. And Delhi does not produce any oxygen of its own. This is a well-known fact. Why couldn't this have been flagged off a month ago or 3 weeks ago?
Zakka, today the nation is going through a completely avoidable crisis, and I'll tell you why. Because you talked about why could this not have been flagged before. We have constantly been in communication with the central government. At different points in time, we've been saying this is what a requirement of prognosis is for the coming week, for the coming month, for the coming 3 months. Now, the entire crisis erupted in the last 3 days, not because the requirement suddenly jumped. It's because the assigned quota that the center had assigned to Delhi of 378 metric tons was sharply curtailed and brought down to 180 metric tons. Now, you tell me as a chief minister who has been assured that this is center's duty, center is going to ensure that 380 metric tons quota is going to be given to Delhi. Forget about our actual requirement or prognosis of 700 metric tons. We are not even getting there. But if suddenly 2 state chief ministers turn rogue, Mr. Khattar decides that I will decide which truck is going where rather than center deciding. If Mr. Yogi Adityanath is going to decide that I'm not going to give any oxygen to the people of Delhi, then where is the humanity gone? What is it that the chief minister of Delhi is supposed to do?
Was this not known to you earlier? Why flag it now when literally we are hearing every single hour cases of people, not finding oxygen? So much so hospitals like Max and Apollo have to approach the High Court. Why are you flagging this now at the 11th hour? If you have these conversations, why don't you make these conversations public?
Zakka, this has happened from the night of 20th of April. Okay, the last 2 days have been the worst. Yes, the oxygen requirement has been increasing steadily, and we have not raised any crisis or panic call except for the last 2 days.
Yeah.
It is the last 2 days when you have to understand why this has happened. This has happened because the plants which are falling in UP have been barred from supplying any oxygen to Delhi. The plants that are falling in Haryana have been barred from supplying, and this has happened in the last 2 days. That is why the crisis.
Mr. Agarwal, respond to it.
The most respected private hospitals.
Here's one thing that I know.
Called out the Haryana.
The union government has put out data about the total production of oxygen across the country, and it's been stepped up 4 times. 4 times more oxygen is produced in the country today than it was 4 months ago, and yet the national capital is literally gasping for breath. Gopal Agarwal, respond to what Jasmine Shah said, please.
Zakka, 2 points here. One thing is that nobody expected this sudden jump and the huge requirement of oxygen, center as well as state. So I am not saying that state has to be blamed and center has to be blamed. Both have to be falling in this respect. Second point I would like to tell you is the Delhi government, they are telling, I live in Noida. Is Delhi the only state in the country? Yesterday, lot of oxygen which was being produced by Inox in Noida and which was supplying to Noida and UP, Uttar Pradesh, that has been shifted to Delhi. And they are saying that they are not giving. The crisis in oxygen in Uttar Pradesh and Noida has particularly stemmed from the shift in the quota from the Noida and UP to Delhi. They have increased the requirement suddenly to 700 metric tons, and they want it to be completely fulfilled by the UP and Haryana.
Here's the one thing. Here's the one thing that I know. That the whole point of policy making, Dilip Cherian, the whole point of policy making, especially in a crisis such as this, is to anticipate what could go wrong. And unfortunately, neither centre nor state governments have anticipated the need for oxygen. Had we closely followed the second wave in the UK and in the US, we would have known that what we need in the second wave is not so much ventilators and other equipment. What we need is oxygen. We would have known this. The UK, after all, went through the second wave in January and February. We had time to prepare. Forget about the UK. We saw the second wave as far back as January and February in Maharashtra. So we had all the time in the world to prepare. But sadly, neither centre nor state prepared for this acute shortage of oxygen. Dilip.
Zakka, during the
No,
first
center
COVID
prepared,
crisis,
but it was
I
the
heard
quantum
yesterday,
was not
Dr. Malhotra of the All India Institute of Medical Sciences said that he predicted that there was going to be a problem with oxygen. And listen to what he did, something extremely innovative. AIIMS, which is the country's premier institution as far as healthcare is concerned, mobilized a bunch of private people who were willing to donate money to put up an oxygen plant in AIIMS. Can you imagine, in the heart of Delhi, the core of India's central government health structure has to rely on donations from private people to put up an oxygen plant because they realized that the paperwork involved in getting that through the system was going to be too much. So what I'm saying here is that, one, those in the healthcare business and the healthcare profession knew that oxygen was going to be the constraint. Two, you have union ministers even today tweeting that why are some people consuming too much oxygen? In hospitals, doctors will prescribe oxygen only as much as is needed. The fact that the demand has gone up fourfold, the country's production has gone up fourfold, that every state is competing, is all absolute fact. But the main thing to remember is that in a unique form of federalism that we practice, we need to ensure that goods and services move across state borders without barriers. That is the core of the problem.
Okay.
It is not that the center needs to intervene. It should never need to intervene. We should know that Indians and patients, those gasping for breath, come first, and everything else must be on hold at this point of time.
I want to go back. I want to go back.
Converting.
Yeah, I want to go back to
good.
Suhail and something that Dilip also referred to. You know, at the end of the day, you know, we Indians, we are known for jugaad. The only silver lining in all of these bleak clouds, these dark clouds, is people are, you know, beginning to have oxygen concentrators inside their homes. Apartment complexes are turning their clubhouses into emergency COVID wards and so on and so forth. Ultimately, the message that comes through for me, Suhail, is, you know, we here in India, we depend on ourselves. We depend on jugaad. We're not dependent on any state or any political party, because at the end of the day, you know, if we don't take care of ourselves, then Bhagwan Barose.
You are so right, Zakka. But here's the corollary to that. To my mind, jugaad is an abuse. It's not something that is creditable, because it forces people to either take the shortcut or take something upon themselves, when frankly, it is the duty of the people who are ruling us. We pay taxes. Forget us for a minute. You very brilliantly talked about complexes and clubhouses and all. I'm asking you, what about that Indian brother or sister of mine who is living in rural India, in a village, in a taluka? What happens to him or her? What access do they have for these oxygen concentrators? This has to be one India. You were right. You can't create borders in compassion. You can't create borders which prevent people from getting health care attention. You can't do that. This country has to change. The Anil Vijs and whoever else is doing it must be shamed publicly. You cannot prevent people from getting medical attention if you are giving them one passport, one identity, one citizenship, one Aadhaar card. Why do you want to divide India even in pain? Why do you want to divide India in agony? Why do you want to divide India when India needs medical attention? What kind of people have we become? What kind of rulers do we have? What kind of politicians do we have who make that distinction between Haryana and Punjab and Maharashtra? This shows us in petty and despicable, pernicious light, Zakka.
All right.
I appeal to you, let the media run a campaign of one India, one attention.
No, absolutely.
You cannot have a division anymore in this country.
I mean, when it comes to saving lives,
I'm sorry for
we
sounding
can't,
emotional.
No,
but
we
it is an
can't. We
emotional
can't
issue.
distinguish between Haryana and Delhi, between Gurgaon and Mumbai. No, we can't. I mean, if it's oxygen that our people need, then it is our responsibility, and I say both center and state, need to find a resolution to this problem. You can't have Haryana oxygen and Delhi oxygen and Uttar Pradesh oxygen. I want to thank all our guests. I hope that at least these last 2 or 3 days would have seen the worst of this problem, and now that production has been increased, and now that the MHA has put out a circular saying that there cannot be any hindrances to interstate movement of oxygen, we're hoping that in the next day or two, this gasping for breath that many patients admitted to Delhi hospitals are facing, that will not be a recurring feature. So thank you very much to all our guests. I'll catch you again. Thank you very much for tuning in to this special show.